Hey, this is Steve in Dallas, Texas. It's Saturday morning, my friend, and you are listening to Light Talk.
Hey, good morning. This is Stan in Gainesville, Florida. Today, we are discussing Too Many Lights, the Zone of Zen, what to do when your show is postponed, and important tech, all on Light Talk.
And this is David, coming to you from the beautiful Belmont Shore neighborhood of Long Beach, California. And if you don't already know, you are listening to Light Talk, and we are the Lumen Brothers. Welcome, everyone, to episode 194. Another week in pandemic hell.
It's almost over. I keep thinking about the future now.
I hope.
I think there is no future after episode 200. I think episode 200 marks
when the world ends.
I'm with Steve on that. I think we go for the tour at 200, and then we call it a day.
Get your money out of the stock market now.
That's right.
Okay. That's probably wise.
I just bought Abbott Labs and IBM.
No, I just bought marijuana. I'm telling you, man, the Canadian company, it's positions, got good leadership. It's going to make me a
well,
fortune.
that probably will. It probably will.
They're betting on legalization of marijuana, probably in the United States. Right. At least federal legalization. It's pretty much legal now in most states.
You could be the Joe Kennedy of dope.
hemp products, oil. There's all kinds of spin-offs.
Speaking of Joe Kennedy of dope, we're certainly the podcast of dopes. So,
well, he got for every bottle of scotch, the Kennedys get a cut.
Wow. Well, there you go. So we don't have any news this week because really nothing much has happened. So let's get started. Steve has our first listener question.
Well, it is Tegan in British Columbia, and Tegan writes, what negotiation techniques do you use when your show is postponed and your contract does not have specificity about payment? Well, fortunately, I am not in that boat yet. So I've had a bunch of shows canceled, but we were not into the stage where we were drawing up contracts and payment schedules were put into place. I think, though, if that did happen to me, I think what I would do is I would sit down and I would look at where we were in the process. You know, clearly if work has started, that's kind of different for me, and I expect a payment. If work has not started, then, COVID's a pretty big deal. You know, I'm not going to beat up on someone for something that's supposed to happen 8 months from now, and we haven't really gotten into that kind of negotiation stage yet. But I guess what I would do is I would sit down and kind of sketch out the points that I wanted to discuss with the producer. And I also think it's kind of important to understand what's being negotiated. You know, I'm asking for financial compensation, and I have a producer who has effectively lost a show. So there's not a lot of income coming either way for either one of us. You know, I guess what I try to do when I negotiate is I try to listen to what the producer is saying, and I try to look at things through their eyes as well as my own. I try to find ways to say yes as opposed to always say no. I do kind of fall back, I think, on a position of asking, what do you think is fair in this situation? So, you know, it's a tricky ground. I think David, you've been involved in this a lot more than I have.
Yeah, a lot more. I mean, well, first of all, my first reaction is, why isn't there a postponement clause in your contract? A lot of people who don't go through union contracts neglect to put little things like that in there. Now, we all know that COVID is sort of what do they call that? An act of God, right? I mean, I think if you took it to court, you may actually lose because the producer could claim an act of God, you know, or force majeure. And there's usually a force majeure clause in every contract too. So you may lose on that. However, you should have a good idea between you and the producer or general director what your payment should be. Traditionally, the way payment schedules work is that you get 1/3 of the total fee when you sign the contract. You get the second third after you've submitted all technical drawings. That obviously would be the light plot, the shop order, the sections, or all the paperwork, and you get that second fee. And then the third fee usually happens either on first dress rehearsal or opening night. And that could be flexible. It just depends on what the tradition is for that particular theater. And I think this is actually a very timely question because so many people either had their shows canceled or postponed. And I had a couple of shows, well, 3 shows postponed, and the rest of them were canceled. And they can cancel them on force majeure, so you really have very little case. If you've started work and they've already paid you part of the fee and they cancel the show, you are not obligated to return that fee, especially if you've done a lot of work. Like in one of my shows that was canceled, I had already done all the shop drawings for lighting and set. And the show was already in the shop on bid, was getting bids back. And we actually even made some adjustments to lower the bids. So that I was deep into that production. That being said, because of COVID, this sort of put us in a new world. And a lot of this has to do with good faith. And good faith from the producers, general directors, artistic directors, and obviously good faith from you. So most people, actually all the people that I was contracted with, we came to a very good resolution and a very fair resolution and an understanding. And I think that's the best thing that could happen. So as Steve said, you need to talk to them and work it out. But I just urge you from now on always to have some type of a clause in there for postponement and cancellation. Stan?
I don't do that much theater anymore, but I can offer an alternate perspective. And actually what you guys have described is very similar to what I experienced in theater, the 1/3, 1/3, 1/3 situation. And I rarely had a show canceled, but I think a couple of times I had to, for reasons outside my control, could not fulfill the production, in which case we just stopped at that first phase, that first third. But I don't even think they had paid me that. I might have sent technical drawings in, and I just, don't even send me the first third because I'm not going to be able to fulfill the contract. In architecture, where I work mostly now, it's sort of done a little differently. But things do happen on projects. Sometimes they don't get finished, or sometimes they stop after a phase. So the fees are usually connected to a phase of work. So after a particular phase, just like the 1/3, 1/3 David talked about, there's an expectation that you will bill after you deliver that phase. So usually the expectation is that you deliver the design information and then you invoice, usually directly afterwards. And then I usually put on my invoices a net 30, right? So they got 30 days to pay me. I'll probably wait 45 days before I reach out. Now, let's say a project, I did have one that didn't go all the way through, and I wasn't paid up into the phases that I had completed, which they were obligated to do. And I had to wait quite a while for that to happen. For whatever reasons, sometimes it took months. Even though the project was canceled. But I got paid up into the phase of the kind of work that I had completed. Now, I want to mention another thing. Sometimes there's redesign. So sometimes you have been paid for a phase, and then for whatever reasons, the project shifts, or there's a change in budget, or a myriad of reasons, you may have to go back and redesign. And so sometimes we will put in a clause in our agreement that a redesign will be billed at so many hours, and then you would say, you're changing the size of the stage, or you're changing this or that. We have to go back and redesign that. And you make a good faith estimate as to how many hours that would be, and then you would basically add that fee in for redesign, because that does happen as well. It probably happens in theater also. So you might have it designed based on the first set, and then the set changes, and you've got to go back and redesign. So you might want to think about having those kinds of clauses. And I would think that USA could help you with that on a big production. And in the world I'm working in now, the phasing is codified in architecture. So there's sort of there's very specific phases, and this is usually when people get paid. But weird stuff happens. I mean, we just did one. It was 11 months ago. We did the work. We sent it in. We did the billing. And because then COVID came along, and we didn't get paid for 11 months, right? And all of a sudden the check arrives. right? 11 months later. And we would assume there would be more work beyond this phase if they're going to use our ideas, but it's been a silent phase. So sometimes we don't know. Sometimes they're fundraising. It's kind of odd. So those things to think about: phasing, redesign, net 30, and try to work with people who are consistently pay on time. That really helps. And let people know that you're not going to accept that because you've got bills to pay, right? You've got a mortgage to pay. You've got people that you employ. You sort of have to get paid on time.
Yeah, and you mentioned that you don't know exactly if it's the same thing in the theater when things have to be redesigned. It actually happens all the time.
Yeah.
I mean, look at Don Holder and all those months he spent in the theater on Spider-Man. That's, I'm sure he got some sort of a daily rate for that.
Yeah,
and that's
the set
what
changes, right?
Yeah, set changes, directors change. I once did a show. It was a huge musical that was in its, quote, pre-Broadway, quote, run. And when it opened into 4 cities, we had a different director and different choreographer every single time. And I spent so much time relighting production numbers. And I got paid very well for doing that. I had a daily rate, and that should be in your contract as well.
Yeah, it should be.
That you have a daily rate after a certain time period. Maybe it's the opening of the first show, or maybe there's a date. I can't imagine it not being some sort of either a soft opening or an opening where that date would be. Because shows change a lot up until opening night. Absolutely. But there needs to be a daily rate at that point.
Yeah, well, that's sort of expected too. Architecture changes as well. The normal evolution of a project is one thing, but having to go back and redesign something that maybe you spent 20 hours doing, that's something else. Well, Wendell in Maine writes, what do you see as the important change happening in the design tech world? Yeah, I've been thinking about this a lot. I think there's a big shift happening where what we do in the theater, scenery, costumes, or people who work with soft materials, lighting, sound, are being embraced into other industries where we have not traditionally been a part of. And let's call it, I think there's a whole sort of tourist industry building up around the idea of experiences, right? That experiences and memories are becoming more important than the acquisition of things and objects and products. And man, that's right up our alley. And I think what's happening is some of these other industries, practitioners in those industries, they're sort of taking the magic of the theater is being sort of absconded with into these other industries, and we should be really careful about that. For example, just this morning, it's going to sound like a duh moment, but I get an email from the Illuminating Engineers Society, and they're going to do a webinar about dynamic lighting on exteriors, changing color, and what that...
Now, what you're doing now in your house.
That's right, like what I'm doing now. But the point I'm making is like all of a sudden for a lot of these non-stage design areas of the world are embracing, I would call it our mojo, our stuff. Like
How
dynamic.
dare they?
Well, I'm telling you. So I think it's important that's happening. And I'm having these conversations with architects too, and they're saying, and actually we have a program at UF called Themed Entertainment Integration, who we're working with, combining with, and they're saying there's a worldwide transformation going on, and they need our courses, and we need theirs. And so I think we need to start thinking about, I've been saying this my whole career, but more importantly, now it's really happening in a big way. It's a tsunami. And if we don't sort of protect our niche, it's going to get stolen from us. Right, so we need to be the ones that those industries look to, or we need to be able to be, a switch hitter. So one day we're doing stage design, and the next day we're doing building design, and I think, or environmental, or some themed environment in the middle of a jungle in the Amazon. I mean, there's so many things going on. So I think that's a really important change that's happening. And I think when we come out of COVID, we need to be ready for that. Our designers, our students, our industry needs to be ready to be in the game, or else we're going to lose it. That's my opinion.
You know, it's really interesting, Stan, that you talked about themed, what do you say, themed entertainment integration?
That's what it's called. TEI
right.
is what they're calling it.
Okay, cool. Because we have an upcoming show with some heavy hitters in that field from Disney.
Yeah.
And we're going to be talking about all this. So let's write this down because I think that's going to be fantastic. We'll give you all an episode number as soon as we secure all the people. But it's going to be multiple people from Disney who actually specialize in this. I totally agree with Stan, and I think that schools need to start branching out. And that's something I was telling my own faculty, that we need to look at really what is the present and future, and acknowledge what is the past and what to leave behind, which is the most difficult thing to do. But sometimes as educators, we do have to leave the past. We
Absolutely.
Really do. And the past.
I disagree. I think in the academic world, we move at the speed of a glacier.
That's true. That is true.
My point exactly.
No disagreement there.
And I'll be dead by the time anything changes. Oh, that's really funny, Steve. Okay. Rhoda in Berlin writes, has the master electrician ever told you that you have too many lights on the plot?
Somewhat.
Not the fact that there are too many lights, the fact that maybe there are too many lights hung on a position and the pipe can't support it. Yes, that has happened. And and usually what happens is like, okay, let's take the movers and put them onto the next pipe and keep all the conventionals on that electric. And usually by just doing something like that, you solve the problem. But, you know, again, it gets back to Steve Shelley's book. Because that very first chapter on limitations,
a man's got to know his limitations.
you can only hang as many lights as you can focus in the time period. And I guarantee you in a show in North America, unless it's this huge Broadway extravaganza or some opera company, and even then, you're going to be limited on time. So why spend all that time focusing, right, and directing electricians where to point a light and put the color in and soften it, when you can spend that time at the table creating by using lots of moving lights? The main reason why I move over to almost full moving light shows, because I'd just rather be at the table than on stage. Because when you're at the table, even focusing, yes, it's true. You still focus the moving light, but you're focusing it in a different way. You're actually painting that light and moving that paintbrush. You're not just like putting it right there into this one position and then, for some use in the future when you're out at the table. I like to get out to the table as soon as possible. So my shows have as few lights as possible up in the air, and they usually are all moving lights. This is really important because usually when you send in your plot, the master electrician can look immediately at the plot and say, this seems really like a heavy plot. Let's talk to the tech director. Tech director says, yeah, there's going to be a bunch of scenery. Our loading's going to be late because of, the amount of decking in the show. I don't think you'll ever get to this pipe to focus it. You're going to need a focus track there. And we're talking about a 2-day focus, a 16-hour focus. And if you only have 8 hours to focus the show and the plot says 16 hours, you're going to have to make some adjustments. And that's okay. That is okay. And it's working together with the master electrician and tech director. I was doing a show at the Lyric in Chicago, and I wanted this traveling moving light over the series of skylights. It was for Lulu.
I love that.
There were these huge skylights. And we rigged up a system where we had these three, I believe they were big Verilight wash units, and very powerful wash units. I think they were the 3000 models back then. And those three were basically on a track, so I can actually move them over the top of the skylight because there was no other way of doing it. So we could remotely do that. And actually, it turned out real well, but I didn't know how to do that technically. So we brainstormed, the three of us brainstormed and came up with this great system. And they actually, pretty much engineered the whole thing. It was just fabulous. So, these are the things that you really need to sit down and plan ahead on. One final thing, I did have a funny experience with that relates to this. I was doing a show way back. Oh boy, I think I was like 25 years old. We had this real jerk as a master electrician. The guy was just bitter. He was resentful. This young whippersnapper was making $500 to design a show, and he was only making $500 a day. Bastard. But he was still resentful. And at the end of the first dress rehearsal, he comes up to me and he says, "You do know that you never use channels 23 through 28. And I said, "Yeah, I know that. I just wanted to make sure you knew that."
Yeah, because he's basically saying, I worked to make that work for you and you didn't use it. So he was feeling, like his work was for naught.
Yeah, or he was accusing me of not knowing what I was doing. And I said, there are a lot of lights I focus I never use.
They're called gamoots.
Or the design changed. The design actually evolved where you're not going to use those anymore, because that stroke of light was essential at one time, and now it's irrelevant. And that's just what happens.
It's called evolution of design.
You talk to any Broadway designer, especially the ones during the 70s and 80s when they had a lot of conventional lights, you'll hear the same thing.
That's a good example, David, because I worked at Production Arts, and we had like 3 white vans that would travel around Manhattan. And very often, the shows would come in with a lot of, the plots would be packed. Penn Billington was notorious for this, right? The plots were huge, and we'd send everything out, and the show would go into previews, and then they would open. And very often, we would be called to the theater, and our driver would go out, and he'd pick up a half a dozen or a dozen lights. They pulled them off the show, and then we would reduce them from the weekly payment so that the rental cost would go down. And the reason they did that is because the cost of putting the light up the first time when you have the whole crew there is relatively small. So you put a light everywhere you can put one. You don't know for sure if you're going to use it. And then once the show opens, then they would always go back and strip out what wasn't necessary. The cable would often stay. That would be too labor intensive. But they'd unplug it, take the sidearm off. There's a sidearm. Pull the fixture, bring it back to the shop, and then we go in. That's why we needed a computer system, because doing that by hand was problematic. With spreadsheet, we got a computer system. You just take that out of the inventory, and then the weekly cost would be reduced. And it made sense at the time. Absolutely. You are listening to Light Talk, and today Light Talk is sponsored by.
This is a public service announcement from No More 10 out of 12s. A good deal has been written about the perfect assistant. On time, prepared, the left side of the designer's brain. The list could go on and on. But what about the assistant that falls short? You know who I mean. Mr. Good Idea. What do you do? How do you make each moment an opportunity for redemption and learning? Well, now, it starts at the tech table. Set aside a special space right now for your troublesome assistant and designate that territory as your helper's safe space, or his or her happy space, or as we call it, the corner of shame. Working with Total Bastard Products, we can now offer, just in time for Christmas, the Corner of Shame gift set. For only $49.95, you will receive a Corner of Shame placemat with your assistant's name emblazoned in flashing red LEDs, a Corner of Shame sippy cup, and a Corner of Shame baseball cap that says pork chop. Order now, and we'll throw in a non-working headset that is guaranteed to keep your assistant out of trouble. And if you order in the next 24 hours, we will add the 4 CD collection of Light Talk episodes 1 through 200. Ooh. Sit back and enjoy almost 200 hours of Light Talk gibberish. Oy. Crack open the eggnog and indulge in enjoyable recollection of past episodes, starting with gaseous sea otters, destroying slinkies, tilt first, then pan. And my favorite, listen to the janitor. Don't come up short. Order now and avoid the rush when the theaters reopen. This has been a public service announcement from No More 10 out of 12.
A bunch of oldies but goodies.
And now, back to Light Talk.
Well, the sound of those crazy ducks tells us that it's time again for another installment of Let's Talk About. And today's Let's Talk About is about how do you create that zone of Zen at the tech table? Now, this is a very interesting question that we received from one of our listeners. And they were basically asking, you talk about the zone of Zen and how did we achieve it? Well, we've had several sponsors that have devices that help you achieve it. But however, when you can't afford one of these devices, there are some, what I believe are very simple concepts that are not easy to master and really take a lot of experience to master. Somebody asked me at that webinar the other night, what do you want your legacy to be or something like that, and which I found to be a very interesting question because I really don't expect to even have a legacy except for my students. But, I do have a goal for my students. And my goal is to prepare the student to be able to be relaxed and be open and be facile with changes and be able to realize when there's a problem that they could solve, and they solve that problem quickly. Now, that sounds simple, but in order to get to a point of Zen that you're able to do that, when you are stuck in the middle of the super pressure cooker in the middle of the theater with everybody sitting around you and all these electronics around you and the director talking to you in one ear and the stage manager talking to you in another ear, and then the costume designer is talking to you in a third ear, if I had a third ear, and you're trying to focus to get the show lit or to work on the atmospheres, that is very, very, very challenging. So I think that if students can get out of school with a way of staying calm and being able to be facile at the table, they will have very successful careers. And like I said at that webinar, we all know designers, lighting designers, who when you look at their work, the work may not be spectacular. They may not be doing the biggest shows on Broadway, the flashiest shows or whatever, but they're working all the time. And the reason why they're working all the time is because they have this ability to do that. Matter of fact, I would say you would never get to Broadway without having the ability to do that. And you'll never get to be a real, truly successful designer until you're able to do this. You can't be focused. So I cut this down to 3 phases of lighting design. And I had an inspiration shower this morning.
I love those.
I know. Remember inspiration showers? They're fantastic. Happens every day.
Eureka.
So there are 3 phases of the lighting design process. One is preparation and discovery, and that is coming up with your point of view, your approach, research, technical drawings, things like that. And that is all through the preparation and discovery phase. Then the second was on-site implementation, adjustments, and discovery. So that is during the load in and focus. So you have on-site implementations, adjustments, and discovery. Now, notice I said discovery once before, because through this entire process of these 3 phases, discovery is there. But adjustments is very, very important. And we kind of talked about this last week. We hit upon it about being able to make an adjustment during load in, because sometimes stuff happens that maybe it was a change, maybe the set wasn't built exactly right, things like that you have to make an adjustment. And again, you have to do it quickly and facilely. So that's the second one, on-site implementation, adjustments, discovery. And the third is in-theater atmosphere and transition creation, problem solving, and discovery. And that is during the technical rehearsals, the dress rehearsals, and the previews. So these are the areas I'm talking about, but the third one, in theater atmosphere and transition creation, happens at the tech table. So I think that it's just finding a way of becoming confident enough and not falling into the trap of having blinders on and just looking at the lighting. You got to look at the holistic event that's happening in front of you and realize if these atmospheres working to tell the story. Because if you're just looking at, oh my God, I need to put more light here, I need to take light over there, that person's a little dark, you're not listening to the story and you don't know if the lighting is doing anything. Do you guys have any suggestions?
I think you're right. I also think it's like a first date. We were talking last week about how do you keep your crew under control. Without that zone of Zen, if you come into the theater and you're a little apprehensive, if you're a little nervous, a little jittery, you're a little aggressive, and there's an edge to your voice, all of a sudden you start winding up the crew. And everything, they're always waiting for the next shoe to drop. It's that first date. You go out, and if you work too hard to impress someone, the evening's going to go wrong. If you're trying to be funny, you're never going to be funny. It's being yourself and being comfortable in your skin, being confident, And simply, it's that old chestnut, treat people the way you want to be treated. It's easy for young designers, and when I say young designers, I mean inexperienced designers. It's easy for inexperienced designers to go into the theater and make it a competition. And boy, that is just a recipe for disaster. It may not be a terrible disaster, but you're certainly not going to get out of the staff, the actors, your colleagues, what you could get out of them if you were just there and being, in the moment and being a normal human being.
A very good point.
I cannot disagree with anything that any of you have said. It's all brilliant. But I will add one thing that's maybe a little bit outside the box. I really think that about one way to help you stay focused and clear and calm in a situation that is, by its nature, volatile, is daily meditation practice. You may think I'm crazy, but I'll tell you, it works. Hundreds of millions of people do it every day, and I think the West is catching on to that. So the West now does more yoga than they did in the 1970s. In the 70s, only the hippies did yoga. I think meditation practice, concentrate. It's not even concentration. It's just being able to have awareness of your own mind. There's so much benefit from it, and I do Headspace just about every day. It's on my phone, and whenever I get 20, I can do it in a 5-minute segment, a 10-minute, a 15-minute, or a 20-minute segment. David sometimes calls me and goes, "Are you okay? You sound sleepy." I'm like, "No, just in meditation." And actually coming out of meditation and talking to David is the perfect way.
No. I usually send you into meditation, if you remember correctly. Let's tell the truth here. After my calls with Stan, he says, I got to end this. I need to go into Headspace for a while.
That's right. That's exactly right. So, but I really do think if you look at the benefits of it, if you look at the science, right, there is a lot of evidence that supports it, and so all of your advice is good, but I think there's something about training the mind, something about understanding how the mind works, and meditation. I will tell you, used to do it a lot when I was younger. I moved away from it, and the last couple of years now, because my life was getting pretty hectic and there were some tension things going on, I said, I need to get back to that practice. And now all of a sudden I can get it on my phone, which I couldn't do in the 80s, right, or the 70s. And I really highly recommend it as a way for taming the drunken monkey that is your mind, so you can stay focused. But your mind goes wherever the hell it wants, right? And you think you have control over your mind, but really you don't as much as you think you do. It works on its own. And meditation will give you some control and some consciousness about your mind, where it is and how to bring it back and tame it, essentially. So I highly recommend that.
And let me tell you what doesn't work, and that is alcohol or drugs. If you're having a dinner break and you've got a 4-hour rehearsal ahead of you, do not drink a cocktail. Do not, because it slows down your brain and
cuts off the oxygen to your brain, which is its fuel.
Exactly, and that 4 hours could be could make a difference in the success or failure of your lighting.
Why would you put bad gas in your tank? Why would you put water in the gas tank?
Some people think that it does help. I save my alcohol till after the
Well, maybe I could say maybe a small amount, right?
Maybe a glass of wine, but even then it's
but it's not really the best thing. I will recommend an alternative. There's something called Dr. Bach's Rescue Remedy. Rescue Remedy is a holistic thing. It has a tiny bit of alcohol in it, but it's mostly essences of various flowers, believe it or not. And you put this under your tongue, and you'll just get calm. But not like calm like you take a Xanax or you take a sedative. It's just a nice calming thing to go into a stressful situation. And I use that often when I know I'm going to have a stressful meeting or there's going to be something where I get anxious about. I take a little bit of Dr. Bach's Rescue Remedy. You can get it in any holistic product store. Highly recommend that as well in a pinch. But meditation, a daily meditation practice is best.
My doctor, and his name is actually Dr. Feelgood, he prescribes me all that stuff.
I don't trust your Dr. Feelgood so much.
Anyway, just to tag along what Stan said, and he's absolutely right. I mean, a lot of it is internal that you can help. But there's one other thing that you cannot replace without doing it, and that's experience.
Sure.
To build your confidence.
Absolutely.
It's like driving a new sports car. You don't just like get in the car and you just start tearing around the neighborhood. You slowly feel that car. You get used to that car. You find out what the acceleration's like, what the brake response is like, what the cornering, the suspension's about. And it takes days and weeks sometimes to really get confident with that car.
It's like knowing your rig too. If you know your rig, you feel more confident. So if you spend some time in advance of getting at the tech table and you feel like you really know your rig, you know what it can do, you know where the channels are, you have some of the numbers are committed to memory, that's also going to calm you down because you have...
And that helps, and Previs will help you do that.
Absolutely.
Will help you learn your rig.
I'm a big fan, as you know.
If you're fortunate enough to do Previs, you can actually, weeks before you get into the damn theater, you can try this out. I mean, I discovered that doing all that Previs on The Tsar's Bride at the Royal Opera House. I spent a week in Previs on that show.
You knew your rig inside out.
I knew the rig. Yeah. It was fantastic.
Steve said that before, know your rig.
Yeah. Know your rig.
Well, I think it's why you see, our students, their second acts are always better than their first acts. They've calmed down. They know the rig. They've developed a dialogue with the director and the choreographer. The second night of tech always goes better than the first night. And then they go back and they revisit that first act again and clean it up.
Plus, I will argue that it's the way you set up your channels as well.
That too.
It's easy to get overwhelmed if you have 500 channels that you're controlling. One thing I always tell my students is take those 500 channels and turn them into 30 groups and light with groups.
Yeah, this is what I love about the Hog. Like I did groups the other day on a project, and in the naming of the group, I would say, okay, Solar Theater's front, and then I would say 101 through 105. And then I would say Solar Theater's mid-front, and I would say 106 through 110 in the tile. So I could look at it and go, oh, okay, I need the center one. That's going to be 107.
And then you set up your tiles like it's a magic sheet.
Right, absolutely. So it's in the footprint of the magic sheet.
That's right.
Absolutely.
Which is fantastic. Yep. But the whole point being is that if you simplify your numbers and your lights, let's say that high side left group has 12 lights in it. Well, you may not need all those 12 lights, but you go and you hit the group number and you take them to full, and then take them to 70, then do another group and take those to full, take those to 50, and record the cue. You can come back later and remove those channels you don't want. But don't ditz, because you'll find yourself behind. You want to get those big strokes of light in there just so that you can look at it and see, is this atmosphere going to work? And you're going to know that. You can refine later. Refine, discover, and refine. Discover and refine. You want to maximize your time looking at that stage and thinking about, is it working? How does it feel? I'm listening to the actors. I'm seeing the costumes. I'm seeing the space. I'm creating dramatic space. Does it work? And then how do I refine it and be able to do it quickly?
Discover, refine. Really great wisdom coming from the brothers today. Great.
Oh, that came out of my inspiration shower.
Love it.
Discover, refine. That whole thing came out. I said, wow, I've been teaching this for 40 years and I finally figured it out.
Well, you're crystallizing your wisdom. It's great.
There you go. I'm crystallizing something. I don't know what the hell it is.
Just don't smoke it. Don't smoke it.
Don't smoke any of this. Steve has our last question.
It's Russell in New York, and he writes, which is better, a resume or a CV? I'm applying for an entry-level teaching position at a university. Okay, so these are kind of two different documents. The difference between a CV and a resume is length and layout and purpose. So a CV has no length limit. Resumes are typically 1 or 2 pages. A CV is going to detail the entire history of your work. A resume is going to summarize those skills. So if you're applying at a university, at least in the United States, or a graduate program, what those schools are expecting is a CV. Another way to look at the difference is that most resumes in the United States are competency-based. And if you take a look at what that means, we're taking a look at notable skills, notable things that you've done, notable achievements. It's succinct by nature. A curriculum vitae is credential-based, and that's a comprehensive look which is going to be lengthy, of your entire professional career. So universities, they're absolutely going to want to see a CV. But having said that, I would put a CV in because I think it's required, but I would also throw a resume in. Some people will want to see a summary sheet. Some people will want to see a CV, so it doesn't hurt. If you're applying for a job at a theater or a dance company, that's a resume. If you're looking at academic work, research work, that's a CV.
Absolutely. I have nothing to add to that.
No, I think Steve nails
cut and
it. I think Steve nails it, but I'd add one other sort of document that I get sometimes asked for in my profession. It's called the credentials package, which basically the architects ask for that, or clients in that field ask for that, which is similar to a CV, but it might use specific projects that you sort of showcase that show your capabilities of your background, right? So they say, "Oh, have you done this? Have you done that?" And you would be considered credentialed in an area if you've had several projects where you've done a specific type of thing that might be necessary for the job you're applying for. So a credential package is sort of like what Steve is talking about, a Vita, but in a different sort of format that sort of shows your capabilities. The government asks for that as well when you're trying to get into the systems for award management for government projects. They ask for a credentials package, and then you identify capabilities of your company or yourself as an individual. And so I do this. Well, sometimes I'll get an email and I'm like, "Can you apply for this?" And it's like, "Well, we don't make tanks." Right? You know what I mean? There are certain things that you qualify for based on the capabilities of you are a company in America. We've talked about that before, whether you're an individual or a company. So think about your capabilities. And then that Vita for academia shows that, but you can sort of format it differently for other types of applications.
So tell me something, Stan. Do you use Light Talk on your credentials?
I would not use Light Talk on a credentials package for the kind of work I'm doing now, but it would certainly be, it's a good point, David, but it would certainly be on my Vita for the university if I was going for a university job, because that's a sort of a form of publishing, it's sort of a form of disseminating information. But as a capability, what I can talk about the subject. Yeah, maybe if I was, if we were doing Light Talk at a conference, which we've done, that would go on the Vita. Some people on their website lists, like I have a colleague who just won an award yesterday from the American Association of Acousticians, and it was a very highly prestigious award. And on his website, he will list the papers that he does, and he lists conference presentations, and even though he works in sort of the same field that I work in now, so it just depends. But I think I wouldn't put Light Talk on a credentials package, but I certainly would include it on a Vita.
Well, I would think that Light Talk certainly certifies us as experts in alternative reality, which is very, very popular right now. Well, the rocking sounds of the Luminoids tells us that once again you've spent another morning listening to Light Talk. You can hear our show on Spotify, iTunes, Google, YouTube, and just about every podcast site out there. Check out our website on lighttalk.org for future guests, and be sure to follow us on Facebook and subscribe to our podcast. That way you will not miss a second of Light Talk insanity.
No guarantee is offered regarding the accuracy of any statements or opinions made on this podcast. However,
if you decide to litigate, the law firm of Flecht, Flock, Flair, and Glare and their paralegal Snoot will defend us until our retirement funds are depleted.
Light Talk is written and produced by the Lumen Brothers, coming to you from Long Beach, Gainesville, and from the edge of the prairie, Dallas, Texas.
And be sure to join us this Friday on Christmas morning for the 4th annual Lumen Brothers Holiday Spectacular.
All of that and a new sponsor.
Light Talk, broadcasting questionable Lumen knowledge and humor around the world.
So we'll see you all this Friday on Christmas morning. Bring your stockings and your eggnog. Bye-bye from Light Talk.
Toodles.
Stay safe, everybody. Stay cool. Stay warm, wherever you are. Wear a mask.